The smoke that rose from the crematoria of Auschwitz was the final horrifying signature of the Nazi regime. 6 million lives, extinguished in a systematic act of industrial mass murder we call the Holocaust. The sheer scale of this crime has led to an inevitable, agonizing question. How could the world have allowed it to happen? For decades, the standard historical narrative suggested that the Allies, Great Britain and the United States, were largely unaware of the extent and true purpose of the Nazi concentration camps until the final days of World War II. It was a comfortable belief, softening the edges of an unbearable tragedy. But the uncomfortable truth is far more complex and far more damning. The intelligence, the warnings, and the desperate pleas for help arrived on the desks of the world's most powerful leaders years before the liberation of the camps. The question isn't if they knew, but when they knew, and why their reaction was so frustratingly slow, so muted, and so ineffective. Today, we dive into the archives to uncover the true timeline of Allied awareness, the internal debates, and the devastating moral choices that defined the world's silent complicity in the face of the ultimate evil. Act 1. The whispers become warnings. The process of mass murder did not begin in the gas chambers. It began in the summer of 1941 on the Eastern Front, with the chilling work of the Einsatzgruppen, or mobile killing squads. These were not secrets hidden in some faraway dark corner. These German police units followed the advancing army, systematically executing Jewish men, women, and children by the tens of thousands in ditches across Ukraine, Russia, and the Baltics. Crucially, the Germans meticulously documented these murders. And Allied intelligence, particularly the British, intercepted and decoded these gruesome reports through the Ultra program. By the end of 1941, London had concrete evidence of mass shootings of staggering scale. They knew the murder was happening, but the scope shifted dramatically in the summer of 1942. The mass shootings were being replaced by a more efficient, horrifying mechanism: the extermination camp. In August 1942, a small but powerful piece of paper landed on the desk of Rabbi Stephen S. Wise, a prominent Jewish leader in New York. It was the Rigner telegram. Sent by Gerhard Rigner, the World Jewish Congress representative in Geneva, the message described a plan that was underway. A plan to systematically move and murder all Jews under German control using prussic acid, or Zyklon B. The official response in Washington was a mixture of disbelief and fear of panic. The U.S. State Department initially suppressed the cable, fearing it was a war rumor, or worse, a propaganda ploy. When the news was finally made public by Wise in November 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt and Prime Minister Winston Churchill publicly condemned the atrocities and promised retribution. Yet, policy decisions did not match the rhetoric. In April 1943, the Allies held the Bermuda Conference, ostensibly to discuss the refugee problem, but the results were dismal. The conference concluded that little could be done to help the victims until Germany was defeated. The prevailing sentiment was that the refugee crisis was an obstacle to victory, not a moral imperative. By 1943, the world had the evidence. It simply chose to prioritize victory above direct rescue. Act 2. Full confirmation and the bombing debate. The year 1944 brought a final, undeniable confirmation of the Nazi killing machine, focused on the largest surviving Jewish community in Europe, the Jews of Hungary. In April 1944, two young Slovakian Jews, Rudolf Verba and Alfred Wetzler, escaped from Auschwitz-Birkenau. They carried with them a detailed 32-page blueprint of the camp's operations. the exact layout of the gas chambers, the procedure for gassing, and chillingly, the precise number of victims who had been murdered up to that date. This document, known as the Auschwitz Protocols, was disseminated through diplomatic channels. Armed with this information, Jewish leaders and advocates in the West initiated a furious campaign demanding action. They proposed two specific measures: bomb the gas chambers, bomb the rail lines leading to the extermination camps, particularly the tracks leading to Auschwitz, to disrupt the deportation process. The U.S. War Department was direct in its refusal. Their stated policy was that military resources could not be diverted from combat operations for operations in support of a purely humanitarian purpose. In fact, Allied planes were flying reconnaissance missions directly over Auschwitz to gather intelligence on nearby German industrial targets like the synthetic oil factory, IG Farben. They had the photographic evidence. The planes were in the sky. Historical records show that the argument against bombing was multifaceted: military feasibility. The War Department argued that bombing the small targets, rail lines, gas chambers, was inaccurate and would waste resources. Nazi retaliation. There was a fear that bombing the camps would lead the Nazis to accelerate the extermination or use the bombings as propaganda. The Victory First strategy. The core belief, held by Roosevelt and Churchill, was that the fastest way to save the maximum number of people was to win the war as quickly as possible. Any diversion was seen as prolonging the conflict. The moral calculus was brutal. Save thousands now, or save millions later, by sacrificing an immediate intervention. They chose the latter, but the consequences of that inaction were devastating. The deportations of Hungarian Jews, which peaked in the summer of 1944, continued almost uninterrupted. ACT 3. The shock of liberation and legacy. It was not until the Soviet Red Army marched into Auschwitz in January 1945, and later, when American and British forces liberated camps like Buchenwald and Bergen-Belsen, that the full, unedited horror of the Holocaust was unveiled to the world. The images broadcast back home, the piles of corpses, the emaciated survivors, the gas chambers, were proof that transcended any diplomatic cable or intelligence report. For the public, this was the moment of realization. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, upon touring a camp, insisted that local German citizens be brought to witness the atrocities, stating, "I want every American unit not actually in the front lines to see this evidence. We are told that the American soldier does not know what he is fighting for. Now, at least, he will know what he is fighting against." In the aftermath, historians, politicians, and the public grappled with the moral failure. The establishment of the War Refugee Board in 1944 by President Roosevelt was a belated but significant shift in policy, which helped save tens of thousands of lives in the final year of the war. But for the 6 million, it was too late. The Allied inaction remains one of the most painful controversies of the 20th century. It exposed a brutal reality. Knowing is one thing. Mustering the political will to act is quite another. The Holocaust teaches us not only about the perpetrators, but about the bystanders. The Allies were fighting a war for global survival. And yet, the fact that they allowed bureaucratic inertia, military priorities, and a lack of empathy to trump clear humanitarian action is a stain on their historic victory. The archives prove they knew. The real question is, why did they wait until the smoke cleared before they finally acknowledged the fire?